The rain had started before sunrise and showed no sign of stopping. Gray clouds hung low over the cemetery, making the entire morning feel heavier than it already was. Black umbrellas filled the narrow pathways as luxury cars lined the entrance. Everyone had come to say goodbye to my father, Richard Carter, the billionaire founder of Carter Industries. Newspapers had called him a visionary. Business magazines had described him as one of the country's most respected entrepreneurs. To me, he was simply Dad. My name is Emma Carter. As I stood near the back of the crowd, clutching a small bouquet of white lilies, I felt like a stranger at my own father's funeral. I wasn't wearing an expensive black dress like the other women. Mine was plain, neat, and several years old. My shoes had visible signs of wear from years of commuting to work on buses and trains. I had spent the last 8 years living a quiet life, working hard as a school librarian after leaving the Carter mansion behind. I never regretted choosing honesty over luxury, even if it meant struggling financially. The whispers started the moment people recognized me. "Isn't that Richard's daughter? I thought she disappeared years ago. I heard she couldn't keep a decent job. She probably came for the inheritance." Every sentence felt like another stone being added to the weight on my chest. I ignored them. Today wasn't about money. Today was about saying goodbye to the only parent who had truly loved me. When the minister finished speaking, mourners slowly walked toward the polished mahogany coffin to place flowers beside it. I waited patiently until the line became shorter. My hands trembled as I stepped forward, holding the lilies tightly. Just a few feet away from my father's coffin, someone blocked my path. My older brother, Daniel Carter. He looked flawless in his custom-made black suit, his expensive watch glinting beneath the cloudy sky. To everyone else, he looked like the grieving son. I knew better. He folded his arms across his chest. "What are you doing here?" I looked into his cold eyes. "I'm here to say goodbye to Dad." His expression didn't change. "You lost that privilege years ago." I never stopped being his daughter. Before Daniel could answer, my stepmother, Victoria Carter, walked over with perfect posture and an expression of fake sympathy. "Oh, Emma," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You really chose today?" I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means everyone knows why you're here." "I came for my father." Victoria laughed softly. "No, dear. You came because you think there's money waiting for you." Several relatives nodded immediately. One of my aunts whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "She finally showed up after hearing about the will." Another cousin smirked. "I'd do the same if billions were involved." Heat rushed to my face. "I haven't asked anyone for a single dollar." Daniel stepped closer. "Not yet." "I don't want your money." "Our money," he corrected sharply. I looked past them toward my father's coffin. "I only want 2 minutes." Victoria shook her head. "You'll ruin the ceremony." "I'm placing flowers." "No. They're from me. They don't belong there." The surrounding guests had completely stopped paying attention to the funeral service. Instead, every eye was fixed on us. Some even pulled out their phones. I could feel dozens of cameras pointed in my direction. I took another careful step. Daniel immediately grabbed my wrist. His grip was painfully tight. I said no. I looked directly at him. "Please." "For Dad." His voice hardened. "You're embarrassing this family." I slowly pulled my hand away. I stopped caring about this family's opinion years ago. The sentence only made Victoria angrier. "Security!" 2 uniformed guards standing near the cemetery entrance immediately walked toward us. The older guard looked uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria pointed directly at me. "This woman is disturbing a private family funeral." The guard looked confused. "Isn't she Miss Carter?" "Not anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I am Richard Carter's daughter." Victoria smiled coldly. "Not in this family." The guard hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Daniel interrupted him. "Escort her out." I stared at my brother. "You'd really do this today?" "You made your choice 8 years ago." "No," I replied quietly. You made it for me. Without warning, Daniel shoved me backward. I lost my balance on the wet grass. The bouquet slipped from my hands. White lilies scattered across the muddy ground. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. For a brief second, nobody moved. I looked down at the flowers, now soaked with rain and covered in mud. Tears blurred my vision. Those lilies had been my father's favorite. I slowly knelt to pick them up. Before I could reach them, someone accidentally stepped on one while walking past. It crushed beneath their shoe. Something inside me broke. The security guard offered me a hand. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," I whispered. He looked genuinely ashamed. "I have to follow instructions." I nodded. "I know." As I stood, I took one final look toward the coffin. "So this is goodbye," I whispered to myself. Then I turned and walked toward the cemetery gates. The rain soaked through my clothes within seconds. Behind me, whispers followed every step. She should have stayed away. Imagine trying to claim inheritance at a funeral. She's desperate. No one knew the truth. No one knew that I had refused every financial offer my father secretly tried to send me over the years because I wanted to build my own life. The only thing I had accepted from him was the occasional handwritten letter reminding me that he loved me and hoped one day the family would heal. As I reached the cemetery entrance, I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Emma!" I turned around. It was my father's longtime attorney, Richard Lawson, hurrying toward me with his umbrella barely protecting him from the rain. He looked worried. "I've been looking everywhere for you." I forced a weak smile. "It doesn't matter anymore." His expression grew serious. "Oh, Emma. It matters far more than you realize." Before I could ask what he meant, several black luxury cars suddenly sped out of the cemetery behind us. They weren't leaving, they were coming after me. The black luxury SUVs rolled through the cemetery gates so fast that gravel scattered across the wet road. Their headlights reflected off the rain-soaked pavement as they came to a sudden stop only a few feet from me. The first door swung open. Daniel stepped out, his polished shoes splashing into a puddle. Only 15 minutes earlier, he had ordered security to throw me out of my father's funeral. Now he looked strangely anxious. Behind him came my stepmother, Victoria, followed by my Aunt Margaret, my cousins, and several other relatives who had ignored my humiliation. They had all rushed after me together. I looked at them in disbelief. "What do you want now?" I asked quietly. Daniel tried to force a smile. "Emma, please come back to the mansion." I stared at him. "You've got to be kidding." Victoria folded her hands in front of her, pretending to be calm. "There has been a misunderstanding." I let out a bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding? You called security on me." "It wasn't personal. You pushed me to the ground." Daniel looked away. "The lawyer insists that you must be present." I turned toward Mr. Richard Lawson, my father's attorney, who had finally caught up with us. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in a firm voice. "Miss Carter, your father left very clear legal instructions. The reading of his final will cannot begin unless every legal heir is present, especially you." The relatives exchanged nervous glances. "So that's why you're here?" I said. "Not because you're sorry." No one answered. Their silence was louder than any apology. I bent down, picked up the muddy bouquet of lilies I had managed to save, and looked at Daniel. "You threw me out. You embarrassed me. And now you suddenly need me." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "We all made mistakes." I shook my head. "No, you made a choice." Victoria stepped closer. "Emma, this isn't the place." "No," I replied. "The cemetery was the place. You had your chance there." Richard Lawson spoke gently. "Emma, I understand how painful this has been, but I believe your father wanted you to hear his final words personally." Those words stopped me. My father wanted me there. Not for money. For something else. I took a deep breath. "I'll come." Victoria sighed with relief. Daniel opened the rear door of one of the luxury cars. "You can ride with us." "I'll ride with Mr. Lawson." His smile disappeared. Suit yourself. Nearly 30 minutes later, the convoy arrived at Carter Manor. The enormous estate looked exactly as I remembered it. Tall iron gates, perfect gardens, a marble fountain in the center of the driveway. It had once been my home. Now it felt like visiting a museum filled with painful memories. Inside, servants silently opened the massive front doors. The living room had been transformed into a formal meeting space. Lawyers, accountants, company executives, and 2 official witnesses were already waiting. A long, polished table stood in the middle of the room. Everyone took their seats. I intentionally chose the chair farthest from my family. No one objected. The atmosphere was heavy. The only sound came from the grandfather clock ticking against the wall. Richard Lawson walked to the head of the table carrying a thick leather folder. He looked around carefully. I confirm that all required parties are present. He opened the folder. This document is the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Alexander Carter. Every person in the room leaned forward. Richard began reading. To my family. If you are hearing these words, then my time has come. Victoria lowered her eyes, pretending to cry. Richard continued. Material wealth means nothing without integrity. During my lifetime, I watched people reveal their true character whenever money entered the conversation. The room became completely silent. Therefore, I have made certain arrangements. Daniel smiled confidently. He clearly expected to inherit Carter Industries. Richard continued reading. To my wife, Victoria, I leave the beach house in Florida and a trust fund that will provide comfortably for the remainder of her life. Victoria smiled proudly. To my son, Daniel, I leave my classic car collection and my personal art collection. Daniel nodded with satisfaction. But then his expression changed. He whispered, What about the company? Richard ignored the interruption. To my extended relatives, I leave the gifts specified in Appendix B. Several family members smiled excitedly. Daniel could no longer remain quiet. Mr. Lawson? Richard looked up. Yes? You skipped Carter Industries. I did not. Daniel frowned. Then continue. Richard slowly turned another page. His voice became even more serious. Regarding Carter Industries. The room froze. Every executive looked toward the attorney. Richard continued reading carefully. The leadership of Carter Industries shall not pass automatically to my son. Daniel's smile vanished instantly. What? Victoria looked confused. There must be another page. Richard calmly continued. For many years, I quietly observed everyone closest to me. I tested loyalty. I tested honesty. And I discovered that the person most worthy of protecting this company was the one person who never asked me for anything. My heart started beating faster. Richard looked directly at me. Then he spoke the sentence that changed everything. Effective immediately. He paused. Every eye in the room fixed on him. I appoint my daughter, Emma Carter, as the new chairwoman and controlling owner of Carter Industries. Silence. Absolute silence. No one moved. No one even breathed. Then chaos erupted. What? Daniel shouted as he jumped to his feet. This is impossible. Victoria slammed both hands onto the table. There has to be a mistake. Several relatives began shouting at once. She hasn't lived here for years. She knows nothing about the business. This can't be legal. Richard Lawson calmly closed the folder. It is entirely legal. Daniel's face turned bright red. My father promised me this company. Richard looked directly at him. No. He promised you an opportunity to earn it. You never did. Daniel pointed at me with trembling hands. She was working in a library. Richard nodded. Exactly. She built an honest life without depending on the Carter fortune. He reached into the briefcase once more. And this, he placed a sealed envelope in front of me, contains a handwritten letter from your father. Across the front, in my father's familiar handwriting, were just 4 words. For my beloved Emma. With trembling fingers, I reached for the envelope, unaware that what was written inside would expose a family secret far more valuable than the company itself. The room was completely silent. Everyone stared at the cream-colored envelope resting in front of me. Across the front, in my father's familiar handwriting, were 4 simple words. For my beloved Emma. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the seal. For a moment, I forgot about the shouting relatives, the expensive mansion, and even Carter Industries. All I could think about was the fact that these were the last words my father had ever written to me. I unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of the cedarwood desk he had always used in his office. Taking a deep breath, I began reading aloud. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. I know today has probably been one of the hardest days of your life, and I wish I could be there to hug you one last time. First, I need you to know something that I should have told you years ago. I never stopped loving you. My vision blurred with tears. For years, I had wondered whether my father regretted letting me leave the family home. Now, I finally had my answer. I continued reading. When you left the mansion 8 years ago, I wanted to stop you. But I was weak. I allowed peace inside this house to become more important than protecting my own daughter. That mistake has haunted me every single day. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Daniel lowered his eyes. Neither of them could look at me. The letter continued. I secretly followed your life. I knew about your small apartment. I knew you worked long hours at the library. I knew you helped struggling children buy books from your own salary. I also knew you quietly donated part of every paycheck to charities, even when you barely had enough for yourself. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I had never told anyone those things. Dad had known all along. Several times I tried to send you money anonymously. Each time you returned it with a note saying, "Someone else probably needs this more than I do." A faint smile appeared on my face. I remembered writing those words. Back then, I had no idea the anonymous sender had been my father. The room remained completely silent. I kept reading. That was the moment I realized something important. Wealth can build companies, but only character can protect them. Richard Lawson looked toward the executives seated along the wall. Every one of them nodded respectfully. Dad's letter continued. Daniel spent years asking me when he would become CEO. Emma spent years asking for nothing. One wanted power, the other earned trust. Daniel suddenly stood up. That's enough. He pointed at me angrily. She's manipulating everyone. Richard Lawson remained calm. Sit down, Daniel. No! This letter proves nothing. Richard reached into another folder. It actually proves quite a lot. He removed several documents and placed them on the table. These are independent evaluations your father ordered over the last 5 years. Daniel frowned. What evaluations? The ones conducted without your knowledge. The attorney handed copies to the board members. Your father asked senior executives to observe every member of the Carter family. One executive adjusted his glasses before speaking. It's true. We reported directly to Mr. Carter. Richard continued. The reports consistently reached the same conclusion. He looked directly at Daniel. You were more interested in control than responsibility. Then he looked at me. Meanwhile, Mr. Carter quietly volunteered Emma's name during several charitable projects. I looked confused. I never worked with the company. Richard smiled gently. You didn't know you were. He explained that every year Carter Industries secretly funded literacy programs for children. My local library had received grants from an anonymous donor for years. The books, the reading rooms, the scholarships. My father had been supporting those projects without ever taking credit. He watched how you managed every dollar, Richard said. You increased the number of children served while spending less money than expected. One of the board directors smiled. Frankly, Miss Carter, your financial reports were more impressive than many corporate departments. The room fell silent again. Daniel looked completely stunned. So, she was being tested? Richard nodded. For years, Victoria suddenly spoke. Richard, surely there must be some arrangement. There is. She leaned forward hopefully. Richard opened another document. Mrs. Carter, your husband left very specific conditions. He read aloud. Any family member who attempts to pressure, threaten, or manipulate Emma into surrendering her position shall immediately lose every discretionary benefit provided under this will. Victoria's face turned pale. Daniel clenched his fists. You planned this! No, Richard answered calmly. Your father did. One by one, the board members stood from their chairs. The oldest director walked toward me first. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Chairwoman Carter. Another followed, then another. Soon, every executive in the room was shaking my hand. Welcome. We look forward to working with you. Your father believed in you. I could hardly believe what was happening. Only hours earlier, I had been thrown out of my own father's funeral like I didn't belong. Now I was standing in the same mansion as the new chairwoman of Carter Industries. Daniel looked around desperately. You can't seriously accept this. The oldest board member answered firmly. We're honoring Richard Carter's final decision. Daniel stormed out of the room, slamming the doors behind him. Victoria quietly followed, knowing there was nothing left to say. For the first time in years, the mansion felt peaceful. I looked at Richard Lawson. I don't know if I can do this. He smiled warmly. Your father asked me to tell you something if you ever doubted yourself. What was it? Richard's eyes softened. He said, Emma won't become a great chairwoman because she's my daughter. She'll become a great chairwoman because she never forgot how ordinary people live. I smiled through my tears. Months later, my father's prediction proved true. Instead of buying luxury cars or renovating executive offices, my first decision as chairwoman was to expand the company's education and scholarship programs. We created libraries in underserved communities, offered scholarships to thousands of students, and launched employee assistance programs that helped struggling families. Carter Industries became known not only as one of the most successful companies in the country, but also as one of the kindest. As for Daniel and Victoria, they kept the personal assets my father had left them, but they never controlled the company. They had spent years believing that wealth was inherited. My father taught them, and everyone else, that true leadership is earned. Standing in my father's office on my first day as chairwoman, I placed the same white lilies I had carried to his funeral into a crystal vase on his desk. This time, no one stopped me. Looking at his portrait, I smiled and whispered, Goodbye, Dad, and thank you for believing in me when no one else did.